this is a product of a great deal of work that we've been committed to since really during the early days of the shutdown, as we continue to refine and develop options as we look forward. To reiterate Mr. Dowdy's comments, we do not have a final decision. We do not have a final plan. We are working to create a setup, a system in which we have options so we can be nimble and flexible as the variables of health conditions and the knowledge in the field becomes available to us. We know that there is a chance that we could be in any one of the three conditions of e-learning, hybrid, or all in person at some point in the upcoming school year, and we need to be prepared as comprehensively as possible. Dr. Gravel, if you'd move to the next slide. So on June 25th, we received new guidance from the Illinois State Board of Education. Just to note that this guidance we received on the 25th has been revised 3 times since its original issuance. But it is still based on the Restore Illinois plan that was developed by the governor, which puts us currently in phase 4, which states gatherings of 50 people or fewer are allowed, and that we must have social distancing, particularly in our schools. And these continue to adhere to the Illinois Department of Public Health guidelines. Thank you, Dr. Gravel. The overall theme of the ISBE guidance is very important, and I think it's valuable that we take a pause as to what it could really mean. So the report starts off with, this fall will not be business as usual, and we will update our guidance as needed in response to public health conditions. All schools and districts must be prepared to return to remote learning if the virus surges again. And I think it's very important that we understand that we could have to move back and forth into different stages based on public health conditions. And we're trying to think of ways that we can mitigate the impact that that has on students, families, and staff. Thank you, Dr. Gravel. So another piece that is very important is the recognition that even if we're able to move to phase 4, whatever circumstances we have at the time will still be very, very different from the way school used to be. Many of us have nostalgic views of what school looked like prior to March 13th. And with the safety conditions that are expectations as we move forward, when they're in place, school will look very different than it did back then. And that's going to be an adjustment. And that's part of the thinking we're doing on how to prepare our staff and students so that the return to learning is as positive as possible, but recognizing that the safety conditions and parameters that we'll have to fall under and exist under are going to feel very different. And for some, it's going to be a source of unease. It could cause fear. It could cause anxieties. And so this is some of the work that we're pondering or putting in place as we move forward. Next slide. So there are several general requirements that everyone will have to follow. First of all, there is a requirement of appropriate protective equipment, PPE, including face coverings. All individuals in school buildings must wear face coverings at all times unless they're under the age of 2 or have trouble breathing or unconscious or incapacitated or otherwise unable to remove the cover without assistance. Face coverings must be worn at all times in school buildings, even when social distancing is maintained. Face coverings do not need to be worn outside if social distancing is maintained, and schools should require physician notes for students and staff who are unable to wear face coverings due to exceptions listed above. And districts may need to update our policies to reflect the requirements to wearing masks. We've already been in consultation with our law firm on the requirements in terms of our student handbook and policy regarding the wearing of masks. Next slide. Additionally, we have requirements where we can have no more than 50 individuals gathering in one place. That could be in any room or portions of the hallway. And outside, we have to have 30-foot gap between groups of people in different spaces. Where this becomes important is in the cafeterias. Our cafeteria at South, we can divide, one of the cafeterias at South, we can divide into smaller sections because we have permanent dividers in those places so that we can have more cafeteria space, but otherwise we cannot have more than 50 people in a cafeteria space. So we're looking at different opportunities, different resources that we have for eating for student lunch. Additionally, we have to require 6-foot social distancing be observed as much as possible. We have to make room arrangements. As we shared last time, and we might go into further detail tonight, we've already done the work of placing out desks to see what that is like. We may have to change student schedules in order to, or either individual student schedules or the overall schedule of our day to minimize congestion. Pause for a moment on what that 6-foot social distancing is like. Our teachers have worked really hard over the years to incorporate engagement practices into their instruction. One of the easy ones to remember is the turn and talk, where they turn to their neighbor and they'll discuss a critical question that the teacher provides them. That's going to be very difficult in this new environment where we have 6-foot distancing. Additionally, there's a recommendation that the teacher is spaced at the front of the room in order to keep at a safe distance. So classrooms are going to look and feel very different than what we've experienced in the past. Finally, on this slide is the requirement that schools conduct symptom screenings and temperature checks or require that individuals self-certify that they are free of symptoms before entering the school buildings, and that we maintain a verification of symptom screening. So that's going through the wellness indicators and taking their temperature. Next slide. Continuing on, as imagined, we will have to increase our school cleaning and disinfecting. School districts have been given school districts will have to adopt a remote learning and blended learning day plan approved by the district superintendent. They must get a formal e-learning plan approved, and this includes collaboration with the union, public hearing, and the board approval. This is the formal process that we have to go through in case we have another shutdown. E-learning and remote learning plans must add up to 5 clock hours that incorporate a combination of instruction and schoolwork for each student. And we have been told that really any day now, we could get more guidelines on what these e-learning plans must entail. A major change from the spring is grades count and attendance counts, and we must take attendance and gauge levels of student engagement. And finally, districts were allocated up to 5 remote and blended learning planning days. Next slide. Okay, I think this is, thank you.
Right, I think we're transitioning here. Good evening, this is Dr. Williamson, and just to give some examples, we think of courses like PE, the normal PE, the kids change in the locker room, they can be engaged with other students in sports competitions. That will look very different. Again, the 6-foot space is still in force in PE. So I think some of these things, as Dr. John said, if we think of school returning to normal, if there is a return, it will not feel the same as it did before. And in other examples listed here, music and band, consideration for outdoor rehearsals. I mean, that's certainly something that could be feasible while the weather is still nice, but a little bit more challenging as we get into the winter months. And then also in career and technical ed and fine arts, there will be certain requirements there. Gloves, no sharing of food. So some of the things that bring our students together and give them a sense of community, or courses where we think that's a really authentic, great experience for the student. It's really important to manage the expectations of what a return to school would look like, because as Dr. John said, it would look very different. And I'm not going to read all of the points on this slide. I think they're pretty clear here, and we can take questions later in the presentation. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Pearson, who will speak to some of the further specifications about our special populations of students and requirements and things we must consider for students in this case.
Thank you, Dr. Williamson. So it's really important to know that ISBE encourages districts to provide special populations with priority considerations for in-person services. So as we are looking at these models, we're also talking about the who and the how. We would look specifically at populations who are more vulnerable. While doing so and prioritizing in-person learning, there are also a lot of different factors that we need to consider for students with disabilities. So as Dr. Johns mentioned, we have the use of masks, all day, all the time, as well as social distancing of 6 feet as much as possible. Within special education classes, we have the same requirement to follow social distancing requirements. PPE, or personal protective equipment, may be worn by staff and students when providing physical support. Many of our students with disabilities require closer proximity and support, physical cueing, hand-over-hand support, and thinking about how we address social distancing in light of the needs of the individual learner. We also need to consider the social emotional needs of students with disabilities who may not understand social boundaries and personal space, or may require support that requires closer contact. And so we're looking at all of those factors and talking about a plan to address those needs, with the priority of bringing in students who have the need for greater consideration for in-person services while also addressing those factors. Next slide. Additionally, in terms of personal protective equipment, consideration should be given to the impact of protective coverings on students who may suffer different other components or medical factors, including medical or sensory factors. And so some of our students with autism have difficulty with sensory processing and sensory sensitivities that would affect their ability to be able to maintain and wear masks. And so we're talking about what are the other environmental variables that we can impact to be able to still address safety, while also recognizing that some students may not be able to maintain a mask for the full day and for all hours. Additionally, we need to consider students with disabilities who are unable or refuse to wear face coverings, who may be provided reasonable accommodations per the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. And so we're reviewing that and talking about what is going to be our process for identifying reasonable accommodations and evaluating the students' needs for those accommodations. We're also considering whether the impact of staff wearing protective face coverings may have on students with disabilities, such as students with hearing impairments. When you're wearing a mask, it can significantly muffle the voice of staff members, and of course, lip reading is impossible. And so as we look at those pieces, we're looking at face coverings that have a clear plastic within them for staff to be able to wear, or others to be able to wear, so that students with hearing impairments or other needs for that visual support have access to that support to enhance their learning. And then additionally, consideration also needs to be given to students and staff members to understand and normalize that some persons may not be able to wear face coverings, and to make sure that there's not an adverse effect or any bullying that occurs in relation to those who are unable to wear face masks. Next slide. Additionally, for students who are medically fragile or immunocompromised, we are looking at if in-person instruction would place the student at higher risk, considering what alternative placement options there may be, including remote learning or a hybrid or other placement options. It's also recommended that the district and other serving entities consult their local health department and legal counsel when resuming off-campus transition services. So this is an interesting one that I just want to spend a moment with, because as Dr. Johns mentioned, we received ISBE guidance on June 25th, and there was subsequent guidance that came about. So I sent a letter to our families regarding that extended school year services, or ESY, special ed services in the summer would remain remote. However, we were going to start to gradually integrate job coaches and supports for vocational training for some students in the community, where they're able to and are starting to be brought back into that work environment. On June 30th, we received notification that we should really focus on in-school activities such as task boxes and virtual field trips, rather than resuming off-campus transition services. So we're in the process right now of working with our legal counsel, developing practices, and then we'll consult with our local health department so that students who receive transition service have access to meaningful community context instruction. We're also responsible still for our students who are placed in special education schools and making sure that they receive the provision of educational services and protections, including transportation. So those are some of the large scale areas that we're working on in relation to variables for planning for instruction for students with disabilities, among others. But I just thought that that would provide the board with a little bit of additional information regarding our guidelines for students with disabilities. And with that, I think I'm turning it over to Dr. Gravel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pearson. There's a variety of operational and logistical topics that we'll talk about towards the latter part of this presentation, but core components of the ISBE guidance are relevant to bring up now. And Dr. Johns mentioned prior that the pre-pandemic experience is causing what school looks like to be very different. We think of the tremendous amount of activities that happen throughout the summer months, summer camps, summer band camp, welcome back events, pre-gathering groups for some of our large student organizations. All of these things, including one of the most important events, which is welcoming an entire class of freshmen to our schools. Working through these events is a bit challenging when you have the limitations such as only 50 individuals within a space. And then we're continuing to get a fluid guidance from the Illinois State Board, where we're also learning now that we can have multiple groups of 50 outside with additional space between them. And so we're taking each bit of guidance and each event individually and making sure that we can still provide programming to our students, opportunities for them not only to engage with our staff, but to engage with one another and their peers. We're making sure that none of those are put to the side, but we're processing each one individually based on the guidance that applies at the time. And then, as Dr. Johns mentioned, as the guidance changes, which it has recently, we're able to very fluidly pivot from one plan to another plan and so on and so forth. Another element, we've talked a little bit about the school entry procedures. And one of the processes that we're acknowledging, there's a lot of people, in addition to our students and staff members, that enter our buildings on a daily basis. And we're working through reviewing our visitor procedures to ensure that those individuals who do need to come to the building, whether it be such as what Dr. Pearson mentioned for a student discussion meeting regarding an IEP or what have you, that those types of meetings can be accommodated, whereas other discretionary visits might need to be rescheduled for a later time. And as all of these individuals are coming in, and we have to acknowledge 5,300 students in 2 comprehensive high schools, in addition to between 800 and 1,100 staff members, depending on what you're looking at, it's a lot of individuals that are coming in. And so having very consistent and effective health and safety protocols are extremely important. We mentioned in a earlier part of the presentation that we've been working very closely with subject matter experts, not only our own buildings and ground experts and our director of operations, Dr. Patak, but also with external consultants that include facility engineer specialists as well as architects to make sure that we have a cleaning and safety protocol that is appropriate and that we're looking beyond just the basics of cleaning, that we can kind of imagine the actual cleaning process, soap and water, and then the disinfecting part. But we're also going a step further and looking at things such as the ventilation within our buildings, making sure that as individuals are breathing, face coverings or not, that air is being purified and that's being cleaned in a manner that's appropriate, recognizing the safety challenges we're facing now. There's a few other large challenges that we face with. Glenbrook High School District primarily offers a parent pay bus pass program. And if you look at the total number of students that are bused, it's approximately 1,000 students, or about 20% of the population. And of that population, of that 20%, if we actually look at these students that traditionally ride on a daily basis, it's about cut in half. So in general, the school district actually transports historically about 10% of our student population. Well, the transportation guidance is a bit different than some of the guidance we've spoken about. For instance, we've referenced the 6-foot radius, as I call it, meaning 6 feet of space around each student. But according to the current ISBE guidance, that doesn't necessarily apply on school buses, assuming that all students are wearing face coverings on buses. However, the requirement prior to boarding the bus that students must undergo a symptom and temperature check does still apply on the bus. And so, if we think from a logistical standpoint, traditionally, each one of our buses, which typically holds about 48 high school students on a high level, each one of our buses simply has a bus driver. And so, as the bus driver, in theory, is driving the bus, prior to the students getting on at a stop, the bus driver or another individual would need to ensure that the students completed a temperature check. And we'll talk about that later on. And if they haven't before boarding the bus, that needs to be administered before they get on the bus. So there's a few unique challenges there that we're working through. And then no matter where you go today, I've had the opportunity to travel to a restaurant to pick something up. I've had the opportunity to get a haircut. We see a lot of plexiglass in different places. And that plexiglass is an important element to ensure that individuals who are working have an additional level of protection. Well, the school district has moved forward in procuring plexiglass, and we're starting to identify areas that we need it. A very common example of where we might need this is in our washrooms, where we have a large amount of stalls or sinks where individuals are going to be coming in contact with water, and we want to make sure there's no splashing and things of that nature. We also have to recognize that some things that we've taken for granted for many years, drinking fountains in a hallway, that can't be the norm anymore. And so we're looking at all of our water fountains. We're looking at replacing some of our older ones with water bottle fillers and things of that nature to make sure that is one less thing that's not potentially a spreader of a virus. And as we talk about spreading of the virus, I mentioned earlier about going to restaurants and seeing capacity difference. On a daily basis, we have 3 lunch periods at each school. And in essence, it's about a third of the student population that is having lunch each period. So at Glenbrook South, about 1,000 students each lunch period. We do have an amount of individuals that travel outside, whether they're going home or to a local restaurant through our open lunch program. But for those that are staying in the cafeterias, those cafeterias that traditionally would hold 200 to 400 students now might be only in groups of 50. And in some respects, you can only get one group of 50 or 2 groups of 50 in our cafeterias in order to maintain social distance. And so we're looking at alternatives with our providers so that as we find other locations in the building for students to have lunch, and we have identified those, we'll share them in a little bit here, we want to make sure that they have direct access to meals that they might need to buy. And we accomplish that by changing our process to more of a pre-ordering or a grab-and-go style as opposed to buffets. And then one other challenge that we're certainly working through is we have a tremendous group of teachers, of educators, of related services professionals that collaborate every moment. And if you look at our offices where our teachers have their workspaces, because the majority of our teachers don't actually have a home base in a classroom, it's more in workrooms. The walls that used to be in those areas have and oftentimes come down so the teachers can collaborate right across each other's desks. Well, in this type of a situation, that creates some challenges because the desks are a little closer together. They don't have all those barriers. And so how our teachers interact in their workspace during their planning opportunities or engagement opportunities to work with students one-on-one, that has to look a little different. And so we're working through each one of those. In general, there's a few other pieces of guidance here. I won't go through all the bullet points. But the important concept is that we need to make sure we're always using the most recent guidance. And here in the very fortunate villages of Glenview and Northbrook, we have local health directives from the Cook County Department of Public Health. We have guidance from the Illinois Department of Public Health, the Illinois State Board of Education, and then also the governor's office, who has a level of executive authority over schools. And we have to take that information, process it, and oftentimes that information is coming in a very unscheduled fashion. We will learn of something through either an email or a website post or a small FYI, and then it's out there, and we have to really quickly pivot and again process through everything. We need to recognize that we have collective bargaining agreements that are in place, and we have to honor those and work very closely through our wonderful relationships with each one of our bargaining units. And here at Glenbrook, we're fortunate to have the GEA, which represents our teachers and licensed staff members. We have GESA, which represents our clerical and technology team members that have truly been a lifeline and a heartbeat to keep our organization running through all of these processes. And then we also have our paraprofessionals that really ensure that our schools are safe and secure. Recognizing those agreements, working through those groups, as well as the special education requirements that Dr. Pearson has, there's a lot of moving parts. And what I'm very excited about from an operational standpoint and also a teaching and learning standpoint is that we have such a strong leadership team that there is no stone left unturned. And when there is, we talk about it and we process through it. And so with that said, I'm going to pause for a moment and transition it over to refer to some of the feedback that we've heard, not only from our staff, but our parents and students. And at this point, I believe, Mr. Markey, I'm transitioning to you.
Thank you, Dr. Gravel.
Absolutely.
And as you mentioned, in this next section, we're going to look at our stakeholder feedback and talk a little bit about the very high-level initial results from those efforts, and then we'll kind of talk through how we process through that and what steps we've put in place to respond to the initial feedback and further develop that and create some action plans to find some additional information, if you will. So you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So first of all, we want to thank our community for a tremendous response to our survey. It's probably pretty obvious as we'll look in just a second to the number of respondents that we had. Literally thousands of respondents to this survey. And just so everyone is clear on the question we asked, it's posed up here. We're going to go through the results in just a second, but essentially there were 4 choices. And all of this took into consideration that any consideration of or any choice that would involve coming back to school would obviously have to follow all of the guidelines set forth that were just mentioned by Dr. Johns and Dr. Gravel, as well as Dr. Williamson and Dr. Pearson. So clearly wearing masks, distancing, all of those things, and we know that that further guidance is developing. So you can see the basic question that was posed, and we'll go through the results. If you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So you see, I said there was thousands of responses. You can see well over 6,000 responses. Glenbrook South and Glenbrook North, as well as our additional programs, were definitely represented across the district. The survey, there was a little bit of a glitch in the email, so that's why you might see a little larger total response number than anticipated, but we still think this is a good representation of some initial thinking of our parents as we try to gather this information. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So this is just very simply showing the distribution of responses across rising grade levels. So students that will be a 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grader in the next year. So this just shows that the results were fairly evenly distributed across grade levels, which again makes us feel good about drawing some conclusions from this data. Go ahead and advance. And then finally, with the question that we showed on the screen just a few slides ago, this was the response. And I know there's a lot of details in that graph that aren't going to be completely apparent. Those are the other responses. But from our primary 3 choices, you can see just over 80% of the respondents said they would like their students to return to in-person learning, while just over 15% as a combined percentage said they would not be comfortable sending their students to school. So that could have been for different reasons. I kind of combined 2 categories to gather that 15%. And then you can see that the last 4 to 5% is made up of a series of other comments, which certainly varied. But it should be noted there that certainly there were some parents that didn't feel like they had quite enough information, which is understandable, to declare a choice on this survey. And it's just as a reminder that I think is important. This survey, as it mentioned at the top of it, was in no way a commitment from any of our parents. This was truly meant to take an initial kind of snapshot, if you will, of what the thinking was in the community to, again, further inform not only our thinking at that point, but what our next steps should be. So at this point, I want to transition to my colleague from Glenbrook South, Dr. Fagel, and she'll walk through some of the important next steps that we're taking based on this initial survey.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. Actually, Dr. Gravel, if I can ask you to skip this slide and go to the next one, because it will flow more naturally from what Jason was just talking about. The survey that we administered to parents was the beginning of collecting, was actually a continuation of collecting feedback from them. We also did a survey and had a huge turnout response to that survey at the conclusion of the 1920 school year to get their feedback on e-learning, as well as staff and student feedback. What we wanted to do was offer an opportunity to run focus groups for parents to drill down into some of their thoughts and their responses, and to really get their thoughts and ideas out on the table so that we could consider them in our decision-making process. So we had a great number of parents, 429 parents volunteered to participate in focus groups, and those focus groups started today at Glenbrook South, and I believe they begin either tomorrow or Wednesday at Glenbrook North. And between Glenbrook North and South, as well as the parents who requested to be part of a disability-specific focus group for parents of children with disabilities, which you can see on this slide, almost 13%, which actually aligns almost exactly with the percentage of our students in our district that have a diagnosed disability. Between all those groups, we will be talking to well over 300 parents in the next week and a half. So we realize that not every parent who volunteered was able to be accommodated, and we appreciate everyone's understanding with that. We also just offer the opportunity to send an email or make a time to talk by phone with a building or district administrator to share your thoughts more in depth, which some parents have been doing over the summer, and that's very helpful. So these parent focus groups are really an opportunity to brainstorm with parents about different ways we can make the upcoming school year successful. We know that this is a very emotional topic. We know that people feel very strongly, in some cases, about which option is best. And the focus of the focus groups is not really to debate the best plan, but to talk about all the different ways we can make the different plans successful. So if we need to be in an e-learning mode, what are some things we can do to increase student engagement, increase student accountability, supports the development of student independence? If we are in person, what are some of the things we need to do to mitigate some of the effects of this not normal environment that we've been talking about? The fact that kids will be back in school and they'll want it to feel normal, but it will be very far from normal. How can we work to counter any negative effects of that? So the parent focus groups, they're also just a great opportunity for us to reconnect with our parents over the summer. And so I'm looking forward to them. I know my colleagues are as well. The two that took place today went very well. And so we're excited to get that input. RJ, if you could go back now to the professional learning slide. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to share this slide because it's something that I'm really, really proud of. We took the feedback that parents gave us and students and staff from the spring e-learning, and we really got to work in trying to improve in any areas that were noted as needing improvement. Personally, I think, everyone, staff, students, parents, we did an amazing job given the circumstances that we had at the time. But with a full summer to prepare, we really have a responsibility to bring the highest quality e-learning experience, because we know that for some students and at some points during the year, e-learning is going to be part of the plan. We don't know how many students and we don't know for what length of time, but we believe that it's realistic to expect that e-learning is going to be part of this school year for at least some students for a certain length of time. And so as you can see, professional development sessions have been created and offered very much about the e-learning environment. We also feel that a lot of the strategies being taught and reviewed in these sessions are ones that are applicable to in-person learning as well. So these sessions are being created by our instructional coaches at Glenbrook South High School, as well as additional teachers at Glenbrook South, and then teachers at Glenbrook North High School. We have some district technology trainer and our director of instructional innovation. They are running workshops as well. So this is just a snapshot. I believe this data was as of well, it was as of when the board meet packet was posted, which was last Thursday. It's actually gone up since then. I just attended a session today on culturally responsive teaching in an e-learning environment that had 100 participants. So this is an overwhelming turnout, and we're very excited to see the commitment of our teachers, our instructional assistants, our counselors, taking the time out of their summer to engage in this learning. So we're very excited, and these will be continuing all the way through mid-August. Thanks, RJ. You can go past those two, and now I believe this is back to Mr. Markey.
Yes, thanks, Lauren. So prior to sharing, maybe if you just want to pop back for just 1 second, RJ. Thank you, Dr. Gravel. So just prior to sharing some of the current options being considered by the district, I think it's really critical to understand the following. First of all, we know that this is an evolving situation. As you've heard, the recommendations, guidance, and data specific to COVID are changing often. So certainly it's something that we need to continue to be responsive to. And then secondly, we will continue, like I said, to be responsive to all of this information as we develop these and potentially other models that further. So really what we're going to show you on this next slide is our thinking as it stands now. And you'll see kind of 3 broad categories that we've all talked about that could be the reality at some point in the year for learning. So we can go ahead and kind of review those models, but I think it's just important to keep in mind that this is not any decision at this point, but this is where our current thinking is and gives you kind of a view into some of what our meetings look like. Thank you. So these are the options under consideration at this point. And you can see there are 3 main bullet points there. It's the same bullet points we've been talking about throughout the presentation. And I think kind of 3 obvious, very high level choices. So first is a full return to school for all students. And we have talked about this a great deal, what exactly that would look like, what it would take to make that happen. And as you can probably see by a lot of the details that were shared, particularly in those last few slides by Dr. Gravel, and he'll go into some more operational details, there are, of course, a number of challenges if you imagine full buildings in our current situation. Secondly, and this one's going to require a bit more explanation, we've all become very familiar with the term hybrid model. But I think it's important to understand that can mean a great deal or a great number of different things. And you're probably seeing a lot of school districts, K through 12, and even at the post-secondary level, that are announcing hybrid models. I think it's really important, again, to understand that those vary greatly and can really kind of target different areas that they really want to focus on in both regards to student learning as well as student safety. So you can see there are 2 kind of models there that we're sharing right now. Again, these are currently being discussed, but there are several other models that we've discussed and we will continue to develop as well. But as 2 examples, the first hybrid model there is 50%. Basically, they're both a 50% model where we would have at most roughly 50% of the students' enrollment attending or on campus at any given time. In the first model, you can see that we would have group, let's say group A, as we would divide the enrollment probably by alphabet, but it could be in other ways certainly. And we would have the first cohort of students, group A, for example, attend 2 consecutive days. And with our block schedule, that would allow that particular group of students would attend throughout those 2 days, and in person, they would receive in-person instruction on our regular bell schedule, as you can see there, from 8 to 3:15 p.m. In person. And then the following 2 days, that group would stay at home. And they would attend via Zoom. So I think the important thing to remember is, even though it's talking about a 50-50 hybrid model, which you'll hear a lot, 100% of the students are expected to attend daily. It's just half of those students would be assigned to home to learn concurrently or synchronously with that group that's learning in class. So if you can imagine, the classroom is going to look half full, obviously with distancing, all students in mass. The teacher would be teaching both those students in the classroom as well as via Zoom or another, Zoom was going to be our primary video conference system that we will use. The other students would be at home, all on the Zoom call. so much like we are right now, although they would have some additional features in what they're using. So all of the students, again, attending synchronously at the same time, but half the students there in any given day. When you look at the second hybrid model, what you can see is a little bit different model here. So you would have actually that group A, or the first half of the students that we have as a cohort, they would attend the morning session, essentially the first half of the classes, and then they would go home, and then after a lunch break, they would attend the afternoon classes from home via Zoom. So in this model, the major difference is all students that are in person. There still could be some students maybe that are completely on e-learning. That certainly is a discussion point. But all students that are attending in person would be on campus each day. It would just be that half the students are here in the morning and the other half are learning from home. And then essentially they switch over lunch. So students would come in after lunch, the other students would go home, and we would likely offer some lunch options for those students to take with them or have from the previous day if they wanted or needed a school lunch to have. So those are kind of very broadly, again, we'll be able to answer a lot more questions about those two of the hybrid models that we have talked about and several other districts are considering that we're aware of as well. Again, there are other ones that we can are continuing to consider and further develop as well. And then the third option, again, at a very high level, is a gradual return model. And those of you that were part of the board meeting in early June, I believe it was on June 8th, heard a little bit about what this idea could look like potentially. But it would be a model where e-learning would be in place, and then we would identify groups of students that could be brought on site as those specific groups of students need. So it would be a much more kind of specifically responsive model to students and groups of students that would need that, but the majority of students would receive their instructions synchronously online. And again, I think it's important to remember whenever we mention in any of these two choices, whether it's the hybrid, where half the instruction or half the groups will be receiving instruction online, or the full e-learning model, it's important to remember the changes that were talked about up front compared to the spring model. Attendance will be taken, grades will be kind of as normal grading practices will be in place, because this would be the model that we're all understanding going into it, as opposed to having to break in kind of an emergency situation as we did in the spring. So I think it's really important to kind of take that into consideration. So as I mentioned before, we will continue to consider all of these models and additional ones as well. And Dr. Johns, I believe, is going to talk a little bit about the wider time frame that and how we're considering these and when we'll be coming back to the Board of Education.
Dr. Gravel, okay, yes. So this is Lauren again. And I want to preface this section of the presentation by saying that, as we all know and feel every day, we're living in very uncertain times. There are so many unknowns. There are so many things that are changing so quickly. This section of the presentation is where I can share something that we know for certain. And that is that our experience, along with the decades of research, tell us that human beings can only be effective when they feel safe and they feel well. And this applies in our setting very specifically to our students and to our staff. I'm sure the board might feel like I'm a broken record when it comes to this topic, because you know how passionate I am about ensuring the social and emotional safety of our students in addition to the physical safety. So we've put together plans that I'm really proud to share are developing very well to try our best to take care of our adults so that they can then take care of our students in an effective way. So if you can advance the slide, I'll talk first about student wellness. So we have our two assistant principals for student services, Dr. Cummings and Mr. Etherton, working together across the district with a social emotional learning committee, a student wellness committee, essentially this summer. And they have been developing a curriculum that will be for all students. And we call that Tier 1 of our response to intervention system. Tier 1 means that every single student in the school receives the curriculum or the services. In this case, it would be a series of lessons that have been created by counselors, psychologists, and social workers. And these individuals would co-teach these lessons with our PE and health teachers. PE and health is a great place to do this, first because it's about wellness, and your social and emotional wellness is just as important as your physical wellness. So that's one reason. It's also a way for us to reach all students because PE and health are required classes. So the curriculum they've developed so far has 4 topics to begin the school year with: creating a collective community. I know that the first lesson asks students, what's your story? Share your story about the pandemic and the quarantine and the summer, and really giving kids a safe space to talk a little bit about what they've been through. Building resiliency, coping with anxiety, fears, and stress, and accessing resources and support. This Tier 1 curriculum will also serve as what we call a screener for students who need Tier 2 services, which are either small group or individual services. So at the end of each lesson, students will be given an exit slip to complete, and based on their responses, our student services personnel will screen all those exit slips and will flag certain individual students who need additional support. They'll also review the feedback from students and, of course, from the teachers who are co-teaching it to see how the lessons are going, and they'll use that feedback to further develop future lesson plans. So we don't necessarily see this as the month of September and then it's done. We believe that we're going to need to carry through this type of curriculum probably through the entire year in some way, shape, or form, so that we're continually giving kids an opportunity to reflect in a safe space, and then also to be assessed as to whether they need additional services. At the Tier 2 level, we're very fortunate to have robust clinical teams at each high school. We're also working to partner with our community agencies. Glenview and Northbrook have tremendous agencies that are dedicated to mental well-being and mental health. And so we're working right now with a community agency to develop a plan where they are providing office hours for our students for virtual teletherapy sessions. Obviously, this would all be HIPAA compliant and with parent permission, but this would be kind of a backup to our own staff. If we feel that we have reached kind of our capacity, we will then be able to direct students to the community agency. Our own clinical team members are developing an idea to offer virtual drop-in center hours. So students who are learning from home, or even students who are coming to school, but during the school day, perhaps they prefer to go to a virtual drop-in center instead of in person, if that's their preference. They could do that. And then group and individual counseling, and of course, crisis management. Weekly problem-solving meetings with our counselors, psychologists, social workers, and deans. This is a very elaborate system that is really what I call the safety net for all students in the Glenbrooks, where these 4 individuals work together on a weekly basis. And so this is not something new, but it would be something that would be in full force. And then finally, and some of the parents listening in on the call tonight might be attending these, we are partnering with Family Service Center and some other agencies in the community to offer a 3-part webinar series this summer. We've had great turnout. These are for parents and students. The first one was Strategies for Summer. The second one coming up is called The Return to School. And the third one will be Moving Forward with Meaning. And again, Dr. Cummings and Mr. Etherton have been responsible for creating these with our community agencies and our clinical team members. Next slide. So really, I probably should have reversed the slides and talked about staff wellness first, because as I said, it's imperative that the adults in the building feel well themselves and feel like they're in a good place in order to turn around and take care of our students. And so with regard to staff, we really want to be sensitive to the fact that everyone in the community, everyone in the world, has experienced some level of crisis and or trauma due to this pandemic. And so we have a couple of different plans in place to support our staff. First of all, just by offering the staff focus groups, I think at Glenbrook North there's about 60, and at Glenbrook South it's approximately 90. Our Glenbrook off-campus and transition teachers are also participating through those focus groups. That will just be a way for them to reconnect with their building leaders. And so we think that's kind of just step one, is just taking time to spend with them virtually and listening to them. We're looking to co-facilitate with our community agencies and our own clinical team members some support groups for staff prior to the start of school and during the first 2 weeks of the school. And similar to how I spoke about the student wellness, staff wellness can also be seen in tiers, right? So we can offer something to everyone and do something for everyone. And then those who need more support, we can direct them to the right place. These support groups would just be an opportunity for people to process in an informal setting with colleagues and process their concerns, their fears, their excitement, their questions about returning to school. The next piece will be Tier 1. This will be for everyone. It will be a pre-recorded webinar for our staff to view on our Glenbrook days at the start of the year, approximately 30 to 45 minutes. And again, we'll be partnering with a community agency. And this will be to help staff begin to think about, like I said, their own trauma, and then also what it looks like in the classroom, both for them as teachers and what they might expect to see in their students, and then transitioning into what strategies they can use to help their students feel safe and comfortable, and how they can also determine who they need to refer for additional services. And then finally, this is an interesting program that a community agency has started. It's called Touch Points. These are just very quick weekly Zoom meetings. Currently, they're doing these with first responders in our township. And they're like check-ins to hear new information, share some strategies, do some quick reflection. And what they're finding at the agency is that people are really benefiting from just this quick check-in to keep people's morale up, to keep people feeling like they're part of a larger community that's working through this very challenging time together. And then last, but certainly not least, we have a very robust employee assistance program that our HR leaders oversee, and that's also there to provide the Tier 3 support, which is highly individualized services, and that's something that we have been and we will continue to reinforce for our staff. I think that concludes the staff and student wellness part, and now we're back to operational considerations.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Fagel. I had an opportunity to share some higher level thoughts regarding the ISBE guidance and how that relates to our operations. And at this point, I just want to take an opportunity to remind everyone that on June 22nd, which was our last Board of Education meeting, we had an opportunity to review upwards of about 20 pages of information regarding some different key operational considerations, from entry procedures to our health services that is essentially much more than just our nurses' offices per se, how our learning spaces, our classrooms will be set up, common spaces, personnel, all the way down to maintenance. And at that time, we identified a variety of completed efforts, as well as what our next steps were as of that time. And since that time, just taking an opportunity to truly recognize our associate principals. We're welcoming a new associate principal, Lauren Bonner at Glenbrook North, Mr. Casey Wright over at Glenbrook South, and Dr. Kim Patak, our Director of Operations, as well as Mr. Brian Murdy. Mr. Murdy has served as our plant operator at Glenbrook South for a few years now, and with a transition in personnel, he's actually overseeing both Glenbrook South and Glenbrook North right now. And this team of individuals has been absolutely critical in conjunction with our dean, student services, healthcare workers, and so on and so forth, to really building each one of these considerations. And so as we get started, I want to take an opportunity and really delve into the student and staff experience on a few different levels. And it begins with this concept that the Illinois State Board of Education has made it very clear that each school needs to have a health questionnaire. We need to know who is well and who might need some additional conversations or medical attention based on a series of symptoms and or their temperature. Originally, the guidance was that each school needed to check every student's temperature prior to them entering the school building. That was made a bit more logistically sound by allowing students and staff to pre-certify. And what that means is they fill out a brief survey using a secure web portal at home. They indicate their answers to these questions. They also indicate their temperature. And that allows them, when they get to school, to simply scan their ID. The system knows that they've already completed it and they can move forward. If they haven't completed this, a staff member who is assisting with the check-in process at each one of our doors throughout our facilities, they will assist that student or staff member in filling out that questionnaire, and they will also use a contact or a touchless thermometer in order to take their temperature. With that said, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to take a pause. I'd like to play a brief video that we shared with our 1,600 or so camp participants this week that just explains what the pre-certification process is. And so pause with me for just a quick moment.
As part of the school district's efforts to ensure the safety and security of the school community, students and staff will be asked to complete a daily health questionnaire. All individuals are encouraged to complete this process prior to leaving home and arriving at the school building each day. To access the questionnaire, simply navigate to covid.glenbrook225.org. Once prompted, enter your username and password, and then click the Sign In button. Here you will be presented with a series of questions. Respond to each question appropriately, scroll through the page, and at the end of the survey, be sure to enter in your current temperature. Once completed, click the Confirm button. Here you will be presented a notification displaying whether or not you are able to come to school today. If for some reason you respond to a question and additional information is needed, you will receive a slightly different notice. Here you will be instructed to either contact a supervisor or the school nurse. If you have any questions utilizing this process,
and we'll pause right there. And so just providing a bit of background there, the concept is that the majority of our students will complete this pre-certification process, as well as our staff, prior to leaving home. At that point, their response for the day is recorded. And again, this is a daily process. But if for some reason a student doesn't have an opportunity or a staff member is not able to, and I won't play it now, but we have a second video that shows that they will enter the building, just like everyone, present their ID. The system will know they haven't completed it, and a staff member will assist them in answering all of those questions. One of the elements that's also very important in these surveys is, as students and staff members are responding, if they respond in a way that requires additional follow-up, emails will automatically have been sent to designated administrators in the building and our school nurses, so that individual can be followed up with. And for our students, a message will also be sent to the guardians that have certain records access, so that we can make sure our parents and guardians are informed of how their students are responding, and they too can follow up. After students and staff are in the building, it's important to recognize some different changes. First and foremost, our buildings are pretty much open for a long time, shall we say, early in the morning, late into the evening, with different activities going on. In general, assuming there's no activities on either side, the school building will be open from 6:45 to 4 o'clock. And why it's really important to emphasize those hours is because of the procedures I just mentioned a few moments ago. We need to make sure that staff is present at our entrances that are open at all times to ensure that we can take the temperatures and assist students, and make sure no individual enters the building without completing that health questionnaire. In addition, as students and individuals are entering the building, they will notice some common social distancing tools, such as stickers on different places of our floors, our grounds, different indicators and signs that are posted throughout the building as reminders of the building guidelines, as they're illustrated here on the right side. We've worked very hard to make sure that all of this communication is branded with school colors and trying to convey a bit of normalcy for the school environment while also conveying important information. At the same time, we recognize that there is a substantial amount of students that come into the building in, shall we say, a 30-minute period of time. And so we've looked at strategies depending on what model is ultimately selected, so that when we have face-to-face instruction, we're kind of minimizing that large flow of traffic through certain entrances. Some things that we've looked at is increasing the number of entrances for which students can enter and having additional staff to support that. We've also identified that we have a collection of students that have an SRT or a study hall as their first block of the day or as their last block of the day. And for those individuals, we're looking to potentially expand our late arrival and early release options so that would be available to more than just juniors and seniors, but all of our students, so that again, we can slowly decrease the amount of individuals coming at one point in time. When individuals enter the building, in addition to taking or completing the health check and making sure that they're maintaining social distance, it is a mandate that face coverings be worn for all those who do not have a specific medical exemption. In working with our legal counsel, Justin Petrarca shared that Board Policy 5010, and I have a quotation here, already provides for the ability for the board to establish different procedural expectations, such as compliance with Illinois State Board of Education rules, which do state that face coverings are required. And as a result, at this point, our guidance is that we will not necessarily need to modify our policies per se. Additionally, it's important to recognize that face coverings are something that are the norm in our communities. However, there are times when individuals may forget their face coverings or may not have acquired them yet. We have worked in partnership with the Illinois State Board of Education to procure enough face masks to provide every student at least one reusable, washable face mask. Additionally, we have procured a variety of different PPE, including disposable face masks and face masks for students with disabilities, such as with clear portals, so that individuals wearing them, the students who might have a challenged hearing, can see the mouth movements and things of that nature. So that's been acquired. The majority of it is already within our buildings, but these will be tools that will be available. We will also have disposable coverings should any visitor, student, or staff member forget their reusable coverings or not have one for which they feel comfortable with. It's also important to recognize that since face coverings have become more of a standard that we use every day within our communities, it's okay for students to use their own face coverings. However, we are working to create some educational documentation so that students know that they can use their own face coverings, but they still must comply with CDC recommendations. And as always, anything that students wear must not violate any other school rules, such as having inappropriate language on them, imagery, and things of that nature. And I think a final element on face coverings, we've been working with our bookstore to also allow them to provide options for students. So there will be the face covering that comes from the Illinois State Board of Ed and the Emergency Management Association for Illinois, which is free for students. But some students might prefer a more branded school spirit type mask and face covering, and those will be available from the bookstores. Other common areas are our bathrooms. Bathrooms are a very common thing that almost all of our students and staff members use during their day. And there are a variety of different opportunities for the virus to be transmitted into bathrooms. And so I want to share an opportunity to identify some things that we've dealt with in this highly challenging area. And first and foremost, there is a recognition that some of our bathrooms have been remodeled recently, while other bathrooms are a bit legacy. And I bring that up because as we have been modernizing and updating our fixtures within the bathroom and the bathrooms themselves, we've pretty much done a consistent job to replace manual plumbing fixtures and things of that nature with automatic fixtures, which is really helpful. For instance, that includes automatic toilet flushers, automatic urinal flushers, automatic paper towel dispensers, and soap dispensers. However, we recognize that that's not the norm in every single one of our facilities across all buildings. And I'm going to give you a very simple example. Right now, there are a total of 119 automatic paper towel dispensers across our district. And there are 35 manual paper towel dispensers. So one of the things we've been doing is making sure that if we process through the utilization of bathroom, that we're replacing those final items prior to sanitizing one's hands and leaving the bathroom, making sure that those are automatic. That includes the actual sink faucets, the actual soap dispensers, as well as the paper towel dispensers. And we've literally gone bathroom by bathroom, identified things, and we've been seeking to find quotations in which to replace that equipment. The challenge that we've ran into with replacing some of that equipment is supply. Similar to as we heard in the early months of the coronavirus, PPE being on very limited supplies, so too now are different plumbing elements and different sanitation items, such as automatic soap dispensers. So as those items are able to be procured, we'll be making those transitions, and we do hope to have some considerable progress completed prior to the first day of school. In addition, there are some very basic things that we can do. The majority of our bathrooms, when you enter them, you have to open a door. So we went through each one of our bathrooms and we identified what doors can be propped open where there's not a line of sight challenge. And it is the overwhelming majority of our bathrooms that are a multi-stall bathroom, if you will. And so the next question is, okay, do we have the appropriate, approved by Health, Life, and Safety and the fire department hardware to make sure that we can hold those doors open? And so we've gone step by step in all of those things and have made substantial progress. The idea is to make sure that students will come in the bathrooms, that there is signage to identify social distance proper protocols, that there are important reminders, even for high school kids, to wash one's hands and to wash one's hands for a period of time prior to leaving, and then making sure that there is plenty of ongoing cleaning throughout the day, not just at the end of the day or maybe twice a day, but perhaps every half block or every block, and making sure we have the personnel to do that. On the lunch side, we have to recognize, in addition to bathrooms, that lunch is probably one of our most challenging times in the school day, particularly because face coverings are being removed in order to eat. And so while ISBE identified a goal of 6 feet of social distance for the majority of our learning spaces, they have made it very clear that 6 feet is a requirement. And so imagine the majority of our cafeterias that are quite large only being able to hold 50 students and making sure that there is difference or that there is space in between. If we assume in one of our hybrid model examples that Glenbrook North and Glenbrook South, they have their population split apart, it means that Glenbrook North has a maximum of 400 students in each of its 3 lunch blocks, whereas Glenbrook South has 600 students. And when we look at how many groups we can fit in our cafeterias, that means that Glenbrook South needs to find 8 more spaces and Glenbrook North needs to find 2 more spaces in addition to cafeteria in order to accommodate this. And it's important to emphasize that even though we do have students that travel for open lunch, in each school prior to COVID, we saw about 400 students on a daily basis at each school leave for open lunch. When we're building a schedule and building places for students to go, we have to assume that everyone is staying. And so we've worked very closely with our building schedules and with our operational teams and deans to make sure that we can identify those spaces in the buildings that can accommodate larger groups for lunch and that we can repurpose as quasi-lunchrooms that also facilitate the ability to clean. So if we have 3 lunch blocks, after the first lunch block, we still have to clean that entire space before the next group comes in. And there's some things that create some challenges there. The spaces that we're using can't be carpeted per se because there's a substantial challenge with cleaning carpet in between when you only have about 10 minutes to do so. There's also challenges with surfaces. We need surfaces that are designed to be cleaned with disinfectant and cleaner. So that means it has to have a certain type of tabletop and things of that nature. I am happy to share that we have been able to identify those spaces in addition to looking at some novel ideas. We have secured all of the measurements and the quotations so that we can even create some additional outside eating areas that could be used throughout the winter months and throughout the nicer weather months and spring months because they're heated or they're ventilated in some different ways. And so we've been able to identify those areas for students that wouldn't only benefit students for lunch, but could also benefit students who need face covering breaks and things of that nature throughout the school day. I mentioned before, lunch service will be a little different, including the pre-ordering of lunches and working through that. And we are also processing through some other unique ideas to further reduce the number of students who might be on site for lunch. One of those ideas Mr. Markey mentioned in one model was to potentially not have a lunch period and to take a clear break as you're changing student populations for a day. Another option would be to allow students who are freshmen and sophomore that might want to be picked up by parents to go home for lunch to have an open lunch experience, whereas right now that's limited to juniors and seniors. And so each one of those areas, we've collected the exact number of data to know what students would be eligible. We've done our very best to make sure that we have the exact data, looking at each space, measuring it, finding out where we can really put kids, and have processed it from a variety of different perspectives. And I feel like our goal has been to identify not only just a plan A, but a plan A, B, and C, depending on what route we ultimately go. A final element, which is truly near and dear to all of us, especially after the need to cancel, as Dr. Johns mentioned, Glenbrook South athletic camps or suspend them for 2 days, is this concept of contact tracing. Mr. Joel Reyes, who is our safety and security manager, as well as Kristen Wick at Glenbrook North and Dan Gorski at Glenbrook South, our security coordinators, have gone through the formal training from sponsored by Johns Hopkins University, so that they understand how to do contact tracing specifically in the environment of COVID-19. And there's some proactive measures that we have to put into place before we can even do contact tracing, or else it becomes a tremendous challenge. And we mentioned some of them before, I'll just re-emphasize them. One of the things that will look different if we take just a general classroom is that students will need to be assigned seats. And why that's important is, should a student, unfortunately, or a staff member contract the virus, we need to be able to identify who has been in close proximity. This concept of 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. We need to be able to know who that is, and seating charts is what helps answer that question. Now, to provide some insight into how the tremendous feedback from our focus groups really helps inform the final details of this, one of the things that Mr. Rockwell, Dr. Johnson, and I heard in our first focus group was that parents understand that seating charts might be a reality. But they said, how can you provide students a bit of choice, a bit of autonomy in establishing that? And those are some good questions for us to process with our teachers. Other ideas, okay, we understand seating charts need to be established, but can we make sure that they're rotated at least on a monthly basis? Some truly great ideas that are coming from these focus groups that ultimately will help further refine and flush out each one of these items. Another element that will be different for us is for our SRTs, for any of our board members, community members, if you've walked around the campuses of Glenbrook North and Glenbrook South, they have a true collegiate feel. Students are collaborating in hallways in close proximity to each other. They find spaces in the probably things or locations that we would think, why would you find that comfortable? But they're used to working with each other and having that flexibility to sit in designated areas, but have a lot of autonomy. Well, as part of contact tracing, we're going to have to assign students to not only a specific SRT room, which is limited in how many people are in there, we're also going to have to assign them to a place for lunch and an assigned seat for that. Why? Because of contact tracing. And we've all acknowledged as an administrative team that it's not if we are going to have a case, it's when we're going to have a confirmed case. And each time that we experience this, we learn and improve our process. But there's no easy way to go about it. It takes a lot of time, but some of these protocols in place will greatly assist us in moving forward in making sure that we're able to get information out to students and parents as quickly as we can, while still maintaining the confidentiality of that student or staff member that might have come down with this unfortunate virus. And so there's a lot of questions that are still out there. We heard from our focus groups today that people want to know, what are the metrics where an entire class needs to be excluded? What are the metrics when camps need to be suspended? We're working through each one of those situations, and that'll be one of the components that we do our very best to present a draft at the next board meeting as part of the master learning plan. But I can say that even in the most recent situation with athletic camps, guidance from IDPH, as well as the Cook County Department of Public Health, it continues to evolve as they too learn more. And so there's just a few logistical challenges there, but that feedback has really been helpful. And so with that, I've taken the opportunity to share some operational elements. I'm sure there might be questions, but at this point, I'm going to transition back to Dr. Johns.
Thank you, RJ, and thank you everyone for the presentation this evening, and board and participants and attendees in this session. I thank you for your patience in this very long presentation. I think you'll see that we've done a great deal of work over the past weeks. A number of people have been mentioned this evening, but many more have been a part of this process, and I want to give them my thanks as well. I'm very proud of this work. The team has worked phenomenally well. We have obviously a great deal of work on the horizon yet to do. We anticipate an ISBE update soon. We are curious to see what the implications of that update will be. Secondly, we're continuing to conduct the focus groups, as was mentioned. The team will need to review the data, the hours worth of notes that we're taking from these sessions, and we'll need to cull through these for some emerging themes. Additionally, there's other sources, such as the calls that we received this evening, that we have to contemplate as well. Additionally, the GEA has conducted its own survey of the feelings and beliefs of its staff. We meet with them on a weekly basis, sometimes more than once a week. And while we were able to see some of the highlights and discuss some of the highlights last week, we know that there's more information that they'll be bringing very soon. We hope to see it maybe even later this week. And finally, we need to continue to keep tabs on the cases that we know of locally. We know that local data is going to have a very big impact on what we're able to do in August. So making sure that we have clear-cut channels of information is going to be very vital to make sure that, to help us make sure that we make the very best decision.